They say that the most powerful house in the world is also one of its most haunted. But what if the most famous ghost within its walls isn't a monster, but a man still crushed by the weight of a nation? The White House after midnight is a world unto itself. The hurried footsteps of aides and the clamor of the press corps are replaced by a profound, almost sacred silence. For Liam, a junior historian assigned to a late-night archival project, this quiet was both a blessing and a curse. His task was to catalog a collection of Civil War-era documents in a small, temporary office set up in the treaty room, just a short walk down the hall from the infamous Lincoln bedroom on the second-floor residence. His senior archivist, a stoic woman named Eleanor, had given him a wry smile before she left for the evening. "Don't let the old man bother you," she'd said, her eyes twinkling with a meaning Liam didn't quite grasp. He knew the stories, of course. Every staffer did. Tales of President Lincoln's ghost were as much a part of the White House's fabric as the portraits on the walls. They were amusing anecdotes, historical footnotes shared with visiting dignitaries and wide-eyed tourists. Liam had always been a skeptic, grounded in the tangible world of dates, facts, and primary sources. To him, ghosts were metaphors, the lingering echoes of a powerful history. He respected the legacy of Abraham Lincoln deeply, viewing him as a titan of American history. The idea of his spirit restlessly wandering the halls seemed almost disrespectful, reducing a great man to a cheap campfire story. He was here to study the man's work, not chase his shadow. The treaty room was dimly lit, the only sounds being the soft rustle of brittle paper and the low hum of the climate control system. The scent of old parchment and bookbinding ink filled the air. Outside the city of Washington, D.C., was a distant, muted glow. It was an environment of deep, focused solitude, a historian's dream. Liam felt a sense of privilege, working in the very heart of American history, surrounded by the ghosts of decisions that had shaped the world. The legends surrounding Lincoln's ghost were specific and remarkably consistent. They spoke of a tall, gaunt figure, often seen standing near the window of what is now the Lincoln bedroom, staring out towards the Potomac River, as if still pondering the terrible cost of the Civil War. Others reported hearing slow, heavy footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway, or the distinct sound of someone knocking on their bedroom door in the dead of night, only to find no one there. Many esteemed figures had claimed an encounter. Winston Churchill famously refused to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom ever again, after allegedly seeing the former president standing by the fireplace. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands reportedly fainted when she answered a knock on her door and was met by the spectral figure of Lincoln. These were not the tales of excitable tourists, but of world leaders, lending them a chilling credibility that was hard to completely dismiss. Despite the weight of this testimony, Liam remained unconvinced. He reasoned that the White House was an old building, filled with the creaks and groans of any historic structure. The power of suggestion, especially in a place so steeped in history and myth, was immense. People saw what they expected to see, what they wanted to see. He put the stories out of his mind and focused on a letter dated April 1865, his fingers tracing the elegant, fading script. It was around 2 in the morning when the first strange thing happened. A sudden, intense cold descended upon one corner of the treaty room. It was a localized chill, so specific that Liam felt it on his left arm and the side of his face, while the rest of him remained perfectly comfortable. The air seemed to thicken, and the hairs on his arm stood on end. He frowned, checking the air vent above him, but it was humming along steadily, unchanged. He tried to ignore it, attributing the phenomenon to a quirk in the old building's HVAC system. But the cold lingered, a palpable presence in the corner of the room. With it came a smell, faint at first, then more distinct. It was the scent of a wood-burning fireplace and the sweet, rich aroma of a cigar, a smell utterly out of place in the meticulously climate-controlled and smoke-free environment of the White House residence. Liam froze, his hand hovering over a document. He was alone on the floor, save for the Secret Service detail stationed at the far ends of the residence corridor. No one could be smoking. No fireplaces were lit. He slowly scanned the room, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. The corner remained empty, just a grandfather clock and a silk-draped wall. Yet the cold and the smell persisted, a sensory anomaly he could not explain away. After a few minutes, as suddenly as it had arrived, the cold dissipated and the smell of smoke vanished. The room returned to its normal, sterile state. Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was nothing, he told himself. A draft, a sent memory triggered by the old documents. His mind was playing tricks on him. Tired from hours of focused work, he forced himself to return to the letter in front of him. But his concentration was shattered. An hour later, he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the room below. It sounded like it was coming from the large window that overlooked the south lawn. Tap, tap, tap. It was a gentle, almost hesitant sound. Liam's blood ran cold. His office was on the second floor. There was nothing outside that window, but a sheer drop to the manicured grounds below. There was no balcony, no ledge, no tree branch. His skepticism warred with a primal fear. He reasoned it could be a loose shutter in the wind. But the night was perfectly still. It could be a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too methodical. He stared at the heavy drapes covering the window, his mind racing to find a logical explanation. The tapping continued, patient and persistent. It sounded like a fingernail, gently rapping against the thick, historic glass. Gathering his courage, Liam stood up and walked slowly towards the window. Each step felt heavy, the silence of the room amplifying the sound of his own breathing. The tapping stopped the moment his hand touched the velvet drape. He hesitated for a long moment, then swiftly pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing there but the darkness of the night, the distant lights of the city, and his own pale reflection staring back at him. Deeply unsettled, Liam decided to pack up for the night. The rational part of his brain was failing to overcome the growing sense of dread. As he was gathering his papers, he heard a new sound, one that made his heart stop completely. From the hallway outside the closed door of the treaty room, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps. They were slow, heavy, and measured. The sound of a large man walking with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. He knew the patrol schedules of the Secret Service agents. Their footsteps were brisk, modern, the sound of polished dress shoes on marble. This was different. This was the sound of old leather boots on wooden floorboards, a sound that belonged to another century. The footsteps paced slowly down the hall, seeming to pause just outside his door. Liam held his breath. Every muscle in his body tensed. He was completely, utterly frozen in place. He expected a knock, a voice, something, but there was only silence. The presence outside the door was immense, a weight in the air that he could feel even through the thick wood. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps resumed their slow, melancholy pace, continuing down the hall in the direction of the Lincoln bedroom before fading into nothingness. Liam didn't move for a full 5 minutes, his mind reeling. He finally unlocked the door and peered into the empty, opulent hallway. It was exactly as he had left it, deserted and silent under the soft glow of the sconces. There was no one there. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he was not alone. The stories were not just stories. He had just heard the phantom footsteps of the 16th president. The encounter had begun. Over the next few nights, the activity escalated. The cold spots became more frequent, the scent of cigars more pronounced. Liam would often hear a soft sigh, seemingly right beside his ear, that would make him jump out of his skin. He started seeing things out of the corner of his eye, a tall, dark shape, impossibly tall, that would vanish the moment he turned to look directly at it. He was living on a knife's edge, his skepticism eroded by sheer, inexplicable terror. He tried to tell Alina about his experiences, phrasing it as a curiosity. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. "He gets more active when the country is in turmoil," she said simply. "He worries." The casual acceptance of the ghost's existence was more frightening than any denial. It confirmed that this was not a figment of his imagination. It was a known phenomenon, a part of the building's reality. One night, while working on a particularly grim set of battlefield casualty reports, Liam felt a distinct pressure on his shoulder. It was a heavy, firm, and deeply sorrowful touch, like a hand offering a silent, shared grief. He leaped from his chair with a cry, spinning around to find the room empty. But the feeling lingered, the phantom weight of a hand that had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. A hand that had guided a nation through its darkest hour. The fear was now constant, a cold knot in his stomach. He dreaded the setting of the sun. The White House, a symbol of power and light, had become a place of shadows and dread for him. He considered requesting a transfer to the daytime shift, but a morbid curiosity, a historian's insatiable need to know, kept him there. He felt he was on the verge of witnessing something profound, something no history book could ever capture. He began to notice that the activity was always linked to the subject of his work. When he cataloged documents related to the emancipation, he would feel a sense of profound relief in the room. When he read letters from parents who had lost their sons at Gettysburg, the atmosphere would become almost unbearably heavy with a palpable, shared sorrow. It felt as if the spirit was there with him, reading over his shoulder, reliving every triumph and every tragedy. This realization shifted his fear into something more complex. It was a mix of terror and awe. He wasn't being haunted by a malevolent entity. He was in the presence of a great and troubled soul, a spirit still deeply connected to the burdens of his office. The ghost of Lincoln was not a monster. He was a president who had never been able to rest, his consciousness forever tied to the house where he had borne so much responsibility. Liam started to subtly test his theory. He would deliberately read aloud from one of Walt Whitman's poems that Lincoln was known to have admired. On those nights, the air would feel lighter, the presence less sorrowful, almost peaceful. But when he opened a file detailing the assassination plot, the room would plunge into an icy cold, and he would hear a faint, mournful groan that seemed to echo from the past itself. He was developing a strange, one-sided relationship with the ghost. The encounters were no longer just frightening. They were communicative. He felt he was beginning to understand the spirit's lingering purpose. Lincoln wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was still present, still watching, still feeling the pulse of the nation from its very heart. He was a silent sentinel, a permanent resident of the house he had saved. The historian in Liam was captivated, but the man was fraying at the edges. He was barely sleeping, jumping at every shadow. His colleagues noted his pale complexion and nervous energy. He knew he was nearing a breaking point, that he couldn't continue his nightly vigils with a ghost. He decided he would work one last night, finish the most critical part of his project, and then demand a reassignment. That final night, a fierce thunderstorm rolled over Washington, D.C. The power grid flickered, and for security reasons, the entire residence wing was placed on a temporary lockdown. No one could enter or leave the floor until the all-clear was given. Liam was trapped, alone in his office, with the storm raging outside. and the familiar, heavy presence beginning to gather in the hallway. The atmosphere felt different tonight, charged and heavy, with an energy he had not felt before. The footsteps started earlier than usual, more restless and agitated than before. They paced back and forth, the sound echoing the flashes of lightning outside. The cold in the room was no longer confined to a corner. The entire space was frigid. Liam could see his breath misting in front of him. He felt a sense of finality, a feeling that tonight would be the night he would finally see the source of all the phenomena. The confrontation was coming. A loud knock rattled the door of the treaty room, sharp and commanding. It was not the gentle tap on the window pane. This was an impatient, deliberate summons. Liam knew it wasn't the Secret Service. He was frozen in his chair, his gaze locked on the door. Another knock, louder this time, reverberated through the room. A terrible, magnetic pull urged him to open it. A feeling that he was being called to bear witness to something. Slowly, as if in a trance, Liam rose and walked to the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the brass knob. He didn't want to open it, but he felt he had no choice. He turned the knob and pulled the heavy door inward. The hallway was empty, but the door to the Lincoln bedroom, which was always kept closed at night, now stood wide open. A dark, inviting rectangle at the end of the hall. He knew he shouldn't, but his feet carried him forward as if of their own accord. The air grew colder with every step, the scent of cigar smoke becoming thick and overpowering as he stepped across the threshold into the Lincoln bedroom. The door swung shut behind him with a deafening slam, plunging the room into near total darkness, lit only by the intermittent flashes of lightning from outside. Standing by the grand, rosewood bed was a figure. The lightning flashed, illuminating him for a split second. He was impossibly tall and thin, dressed in a simple black suit from another era. He was turned away from Liam, his shoulders slumped, his form solid and real, not translucent or ghostly. Liam couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. He was in the presence of Abraham Lincoln. The figure did not seem to notice him. He walked slowly, heavily, towards the large window that overlooked the rain-lashed grounds. He stood there for a long time, his silhouette framed by the flashing lightning, his head bowed. The sense of grief and sorrow emanating from him was a physical force, a crushing weight that brought Liam to his knees. It was the collective grief of a nation at war, the pain of every lost soldier, every grieving mother, concentrated in one solitary figure. Then the ghost turned. The lightning flashed again, and Liam saw his face. It was the face from the $5 bill, the face from the history books, but it was etched with a deep, profound agony that no photograph had ever captured. His eyes were hollow, filled with a bottomless despair. He looked directly at Liam, not with anger or malice, but with a gaze of infinite weariness and a silent, desperate plea for peace. The apparition raised a long, bony hand and pointed not at Liam, but through him, towards the window and the city beyond. The gesture was clear, a warning, a burden, a question. The storm outside reached a crescendo, and the room was plunged into absolute blackness and a deafening silence. The oppressive cold vanished. Liam was alone again. He didn't remember how long he stayed there, crumpled on the floor. The next thing he knew, the door was being opened by a Secret Service agent. The lockdown had ended. The agent found Liam pale, shivering, and unable to form a coherent sentence. He just kept muttering, the weight, the terrible weight of it all. He was escorted from the building, his project left unfinished on the desk in the treaty room. Liam resigned the next day. He never set foot in the White House again. The official reason was personal health issues. But everyone who saw him that night knew he had seen something that had irrevocably broken him. He left Washington and moved to a small town, abandoning his historical career. He could no longer study history. He had felt its true, crushing weight. He never spoke in detail about what he saw, but the image was seared into his mind. It wasn't the image of a ghost that haunted him in his waking nightmares. It was the look in Lincoln's eyes, a look of a man who had died over a century and a half ago, but had never been relieved of his duty. A soul still standing watch over a nation he feared was perpetually on the brink. The archivist Alina took over the project. When she entered the treaty room, she found the documents neatly stacked. But one item was out of place. A single, leather-bound volume of Walt Whitman's poetry was lying open on the desk. It was open to the poem, "O Captain, My Captain," a lament for the fallen president. A single dry cigar, old and unlit, was resting beside it. Liam's experience was never officially recorded, becoming just another whispered story in the long, haunted history of the White House. It was a cautionary tale for new interns and late-night staffers, a reminder that the building's history was not just contained in books and archives, but was a living, breathing, and sometimes sorrowful presence. The old man, as Alina called him, was still there. The reports from the White House continue to this day, passed down through generations of staff, families, and world leaders. The sound of slow, pacing footsteps in the night, the unexplained cold spots that chill the skin, the faint, phantom smell of a cigar. These are not just ghost stories. They are the enduring legacy of a president whose spirit is as much a part of the house as its physical foundations. Lincoln's ghost is not a terrifying specter seeking revenge or causing harm. His is a presence born of immense responsibility and unending love for a fractured country. He is a sentinel, a silent watcher, forever bound to the house where he fought to hold the Union together. His spirit is a permanent fixture, a constant, solemn reminder of the nation's highest ideals and its deepest wounds. And so, If you ever find yourself walking the hallowed halls of the White House late at night, and you feel a sudden chill or hear a heavy sigh, know that you are not alone. You may just be in the presence of a president who is still on duty, forever carrying the burden of his office. The real question isn't whether he is still there, but whether his weary soul will ever truly find peace.